So the NBA world was shaken to its core with a trade that happened on Saturday evening, Sunday-ish. It was like around midnight when the Dallas Mavericks traded Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers for Anthony Davis. We're going to go through it. We're going to take a look at it here, give my thoughts and impressions on it, and why I believe this is the most disrespectful superstar trade we've ever seen in NBA history. So about late Saturday evening, early Sunday, the Dallas Mavericks completed a trade that sent Luka Doncic, Markieff Morris, and Maxi Kleber to the Los Angeles Lakers in a 3-team deal in exchange for Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and a 2029 first-round pick. The Utah Jazz were the third team in that trade. They received Jalen Hood-Schifino, a 2020 and two 2025 second-round picks in this deal. And I think one of the biggest things when you talk about this deal that the Mavericks and Lakers have made with one another is the shock element of it, due to the fact that we heard nothing, no rumblings, no rumors, no reports, not even an inkling that Dallas was remotely interested in moving Luka, right? And that's a big deal because when you take a look at the superstar caliber, the caliber of superstar that Luka is, we're talking about a guy, obviously he's from Slovenia, has been playing professional basketball since he was a teenager, right? But we're talking about a guy who's an international phenom as it pertains to the game of basketball, right? Luka is well known, well renowned the world over because of the fact that he is so good at such a young age and he's had so much success in the NBA. I mean, a season ago, he was able to lead his team to an NBA Finals. A couple of seasons before that, he led his team to a conference finals. So when you talk about a superstar of Luka's caliber, right, and what he's accomplished in the league so far, he's third in scoring average amongst all players in NBA history and second in playoff scoring average, right behind Michael Jordan in NBA history. I mean, we're talking about a guy who is well on his way to being one of the all-time great players in the NBA. So when you take a look at it from that perspective, this trade just going down in the dead of night, in the middle of the night with no one knowing, is so shocking because of the fact of who Luka is as a player and his status and his stature as a player to this point of his career. No one expected this. And in addition to the fact that, you know, things had seemed to be going pretty well with him in Dallas, we had no inkling, no rumblings about any discontent between these two parties, between him and the Dallas Mavericks organization. We heard nothing. So we were all kind of taken aback and caught off guard by this. And I think that is why you're seeing such a initial disbelief and shock when the trade was announced by Shams late Saturday, early Sunday. So we were all completely caught off guard, right, by this trade. But, you know, now that it happened, now that we see it, you know, I would say for me, besides the whole trade itself, if I'm being honest in terms of how shocking it was, but the biggest issue I have with this trade is how little Dallas got back for a guy of Luka's talent. I just told you, he's well on his way to being an all-time great player ever in the history of basketball. All of a sudden, you're only getting, and look, Anthony Davis is a Hall of Famer in his own right. I want to make that very clear. He is legit going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's a top 75 player of all time in the NBA. I'm not trying to disparage anything on him by making this statement, but at the same time, you only got Anthony Davis, Max Christie, in a 2029 first round pick for a guy that is an all-time, or possibly on his way to becoming an all-time great, who is currently only 26. When we live in a world where the Utah Jazz traded Rudy Gobert for 5 first-round picks, when we live in a world where the Brooklyn Nets traded Mikal Bridges for like 6 first-round picks, you only got 1 for Luka Doncic. The return to me is something that needs to be scrutinized heavily when we evaluate Nico Harrison in this iteration of the trade. But I also want to bring attention to this. Sorry, it's a quick side. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. I want to stay focused. Shout out Dr. Umar.
Brothers, we must stay focused at all times.
But I want to stay focused on, you know, what the actual task is. But I do want to make this point. Oftentimes, when I see this on NBA Twitter all the time, our team doesn't have enough assets, or, oh, we could definitely get him if we wanted, or we could do this. Nah, at the end of the day in sports, when we talk about trades, one of the biggest things that make the most amount of importance, makes the most amount of difference, is the relationships between all these different GMs, right? Nico Harrison and Rob Pelinka go back a long way, from when Rob Pelinka, who was Kobe Bryant's agent at the time, and Nico Harrison was an executive at Nike, which would in turn mean that they definitely had an existing relationship before becoming, obviously, GMs of their respective teams. Those relationships matter, and we've seen it time and time again. It's not always about the assets that you have, it's about the relationships that these GMs have with one another. And I think in this particular context, we saw that play out in this trade. But when I look at this trade and when I look at the return, I definitely think that, it needs to be scrutinized a little bit more for a superstar of Luka's caliber to only be traded for, Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and 1 first-round pick at 26 years old is not an example of a GM getting the most out of his asset as you possibly can, which is step one as to why I think this is one of the most disrespectful superstar trades of all time, right? That return in itself to me is disrespectful. But as I said, this return was something that really caught a lot of people off guard, and a lot of people, rightfully so, scrutinized why they didn't get more, myself included. But now let's actually talk about the basketball fit and the reasoning behind this trade in general, right? So let's start with the Dallas Mavericks perspective. Obviously, we've kind of seen the reports, right? Dallas has been growing increasingly more concerned with the status of Luka's approach to the game of basketball, right? He doesn't take his conditioning very seriously, right? They feel like at times he gets overweight a little bit too easily. He doesn't take his nutrition as seriously, right? And he's not in the greatest condition, as I said earlier, right? And I think that played a big role in their concerns for the future. And another element why I think this is a super disrespectful superstar trade and not wanting to pay Luka that supermax, right? And them trading Luka in the way that they did, right, in a way screwed him out of, what was it, about $116 million, right? Cost him that much money just by moving him. So they disrespected him to me by that low return. They disrespected him again, to my opinion, by costing him that supermax, right? Costing him that contract that he would really want going forward in the future. They decided to cash in on a piece that they felt like would put them in a better position to win than Luka in getting a guy like Anthony Davis. And look, I can actually kind of respect the vision. It took me a while, but I actually see how this could possibly be beneficial for both teams, right? It took me a while. I gotta keep saying it. I had to kind of bend over and squint my eye and really try and figure out how this trade made sense. But the more I think about it, the more I think it does make sense. That does not mean I agree with the trade. I'm going to make that very clear, but I do think on some level it makes sense. And from the Dallas perspective, look, they're one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. And they've got a lot of guys on that roster that can defend, right? Even Kyrie himself is not having a very bad season defensively and has played solid on both sides of the floor, right? And then you got a guy like Gafford, you got a guy like Lively, you got a guy like PJ Washington, Najee Marshall, Klay Thompson, a lot of good perimeter defenders on that squad. You go ahead and you add a guy like Anthony Davis, who can be a difference maker. There are injury concerns, obviously, there with AD, right? But who can be a difference maker on both sides of the basketball. And the basketball fit, I really do see it with Kyrie Irving, right? That pick and roll can be disgusting, right? Having those two operate in the pick and roll, Kyrie being able to make you as a defender pick your poison between whether or not you want to guard him on that mid-range, pull up, step back three, get to the rim if he wants to, or if he could just lob it up to AD or get the advantage to get AD a nice little layup or anything to that effect. I think the vision is there. But at the same time, these are also guys who have durability issues, right? Klay Thompson, Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, guys who are approaching their mid-30s and to me are going to have more injury concerns going forward. And from the Los Angeles perspective, this was the harder one I had to see. I don't see the basketball fit at all. I'll be completely honest with you. I don't see how Luka and LeBron fit together, right? And I've been talking to so many friends about this and trying to make sense of that basketball fit, and nobody has to this point have provided me with one, in addition to the fact that they've lost their front court depth. So when I look at it from Dallas, from the Lakers perspective, I see only one path and one pathway forward only, especially with the redundant skill sets of LeBron and Luka. And I think obviously the Lakers are preparing for life after LeBron. This is how you do it. You get yourself a superstar, you get yourself a guy who is going to be in the prime of his career within the next 2 or 3 years, because I still don't think he's really even in his prime yet. That's really scary about how good he's been, right? But I don't think he's even in his prime yet at 26 years old, right? So this is a guy that you're getting to kind of pave the way for the future of what Los Angeles Lakers basketball is going to look like. And it's no longer LeBron's team. You're no longer pandering to LeBron. This is Luka Doncic's team. So when I look at it from that perspective, I do see how both teams could have benefited from this trade, and I think it makes sense on some level, but the basketball fit specifically for the Lakers I really don't like. And even for Dallas, I think you do need to do more. I don't like just having all those guys together. Now, I know Dallas was a team that was mentioned by Jimmy Butler that he may have interest in going to, and I think they are going to try and take a look at trying to land Jimmy. And if that is possible, if they land Jimmy Butler in addition to Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, along with keeping maybe a guy like PJ Washington and or Lively, Max Christie is still there. I don't know who they would move, right? But, you know, if you can find a way to land him in addition to what you have, then to me, that's a roster that fits together really, really well on paper, right? You've got a guard in Luka and Kyrie that can get to the rim, that can finish, that can make shots. Is a very clutch player. You've got a guy in Jimmy who's a very solid perimeter defender. Klay, another guy that's a solid perimeter defender. AD, who's in the paint. The possibilities are endless if they can land Jimmy Butler. Like, I see the championship vision. I see the win now window if they land him. But if they don't, I don't know how well and how effective that's going to be. Taking a look at everything, though, and why I think this is a very disrespectful trade to Luka. For them to just quit on him at 26 years old, for them to cost him millions of dollars with that Supermax, for the return that they got, to trade him the way that they did without even talking to him, to me, it's so disrespectful. I've never seen such a trade, such a flagrant condemnation in public fashion, the way the way the Mavericks did Luka. And look, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm the biggest Luka fan. I'm not, right? I enjoy watching him play basketball, but at the same time, I do believe his style of basketball does frustrate me, because when I see his team having success moving the ball, I do feel like sometimes the ball stops with him, but that's no reason to just move off of him. I understand the conditioning concerns. I understand the injury concerns, and I understand maybe his approach to the game isn't what you like, especially somebody like Nico Harrison coming from a very strict background. But at the end of the day, you don't just trade a guy like Luka in the middle of the night without entertaining any conversation with other teams. What type of program are you running over there, right? Respectfully. And then he didn't let Jason Kidd know. He didn't let any of the other star players on that roster know he was making that move. It's not a good look, right? And I do have a concern about a guy like Kyrie, who's very, very keen on player empowerment, right? A guy like Nico Harrison, who's done a great job, in my opinion, being a player's GM, just going ahead and making a decision like this, to me, is super reckless. And he's not really considering the consequences of what it could do to a guy like Kyrie Irving in terms of his willingness to play. Kyrie's been a model citizen the past 2 seasons in Dallas. I would hate to see that change. Right, a guy like Klay Thompson, who Kyrie recruited, and Klay said he wanted to play with Luka. How does that make him feel? Right? How did every single guy in that locker room look at how this front office does business and how ownership does business? And I think that does at times affect the willingness to play. So I hope, and I'm hopeful that Dallas doesn't experience that, but they need to really consider the consequences of making a deal like this the way they did it, and really try to factor that in, because to me, this was a very disrespectful trade to a guy that had been a superstar and had led you to the NBA Finals, led you to a conference finals, right? Who kind of brought Dallas back to relevance upon Dirk Nowitzki's retirement. So not a fan of how it went down. I do think it was a slap in the face to Luka, right? And then even the quote that Nico Harrison left, right? I believe defense wins championships. That's insane, bro. That's insane. But those are my thoughts on the trade. We'll see who wins it, right? I think this is one of those super complicated trades where you probably won't know who wins it until 2 or 3 years from now, depending on the success. And then even in the Lakers case, if Luka can win a championship in the next 5 years, then to me, then it's valid. But we'll see what happens with that. I do think this also does spell the end of LeBron in LA. I think that's coming sooner rather than later. I know there are talks of him signing an extension. I could be wrong, but I just don't see why he would stick around when there are other teams that could possibly use him in a way that's more effective and can actually result in winning now. But those are my thoughts on the trade. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. But until next time, we hope you keep it inside the lines.